Welcome to the Hockey Writers Maple Leafs Lounge, a weekly show from our Toronto Maple Leafs writing crew, bringing you the latest news, rumors, trades, player grades, prospects, and much more. From training camp to the playoffs, from draft day to the trade deadline, our team covers everything that happens with the blue and white. Come on in and pull up a chair. Welcome to the Maple Leafs Lounge.
Hello and welcome back to the Maple Leafs Lounge. I am your host, Peter Baracchini, and as you can see, we're going through a little bit of a roster restructuring right now. Similar to what the Maple Leafs are probably going through in the offseason. If you aren't aware, Shane Sini, who was our Maple Leafs writer and correspondent, he has moved on to bigger and better things with TLN. He has made the jump there, but we wish him the best of luck and everything else in the future and hope everything is successful with him in that regard. But I am joined by two more Maple Leaf writers that are pumping out content daily and consistently over at the Hockey Writers. Spencer Lazary and Jim Parsons are here with me to join in on the Maple Leafs Lounge. Jim, how are you doing?
I'm doing really well. Thank you. I appreciate this. It's going to be fun. I've been contributing some stuff with the Maple Leafs for a long time, but now that some folks have moved on, it's going to be an opportunity to do a lot more of it. And I am looking forward to being part of the show.
Absolutely. Glad to have you here. And Spencer, first time on the Maple Leafs Lounge as well. How are you doing, buddy?
I'm excited but nervous. I second what Jim said, though. A lot of opportunity to get some more content out with us guys, so I'm happy for it.
Definitely. I remember the first time doing my first episode. Yeah, nerves were there, but you know what? It'll come over time. And you know what? Let's get right into it. Obviously, the Maple Leafs are in that phase where they're probably going to be linked to everybody that's out on the market, whether it's free agency, trades, you name it. They're going to have a lot of spots to fill come free agent frenzy or even before the trade at the NHL draft, where trades usually happen. And the big news coming out of not necessarily today, but even recently, as on Saturday, Elliotte Friedman broke some interesting news in regards to Scott Laughton from the Philadelphia Flyers and how he is a name that has been in the rumor mill for quite some time. Now, the Maple Leafs did have interest in him back in 2021. I wrote a piece about how they should acquire him, actually, and it didn't quite happen. And now this is another opportunity presenting itself where Scott Laughton might be a possible fit for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Jim, what do you think of these new Scott Laughton rumors, considering the fact that, if the Flyers would like to keep him, but if they have to move him, is this the right move for Toronto?
I think it fits for sure. I think Philadelphia is going to be all over the place, right? Like They are the team that's everywhere right now. They're the guys that are making the moves, and Columbus is in this too. But Philadelphia, we knew coming into this offseason with Daniel Briere at the helm was going to be making a lot of trades. So Scott Laughton's name being out there, I guess might be a little bit surprising considering he's got 3 years left on his deal, and you would think that the Flyers would be moving contracts that they're trying to get rid of, and Laughton may not necessarily be that guy. He's a player that has got some use, right? I think even Briere likes him. I don't know that they necessarily want to move him, but all bets are off in Philadelphia, right? Like anybody that's going to get anything decent in terms of an offer is going to be discussed there. So for Toronto, I get the logic behind adding a player like that. He's got some term left. They're probably going to retain salary if they can get a deal that works for them. So then he becomes a pretty affordable player for the Maple Leafs, and salary cap's going to be a concern for them. They've got some money, but they've got other things they want to do. I think he fits. Now, is Toronto going to be the only team that's looking at this? No, of course not, right? Laughton's going to be a popular guy, as he is very popular in Philadelphia. So I think if you're going to trade for him, it's going to be probably a pretty sizable deal. Like he's not like the kind of guy that's going to get you a massive return or anything like that, but when pieced together with other things, and we saw that Columbus and Philadelphia trade, how complicated that was when you got LA in it, I think you're going to see something like that with Laughton if he's involved. So I think it's going to be a bigger trade that's got a lot of moving parts, but I could see Toronto being in on this. It makes a lot of sense.
And we will get to a name very shortly that, Elliotte Friedman recently mentioned on the 32 Thoughts podcast in just a moment. But Spencer, how big of a fit would this be for the Toronto Maple Leafs, considering that it would bulk up their center depth and they kind of need to add a little bit more jam and a little bit more bite to their bottom six?
Yeah, I think that it'll be beneficial for the Leafs to have like a third solid or center behind John Tavares, who can also bump up if needed. John Tavares can come down. But to go off what Jim said, in terms of the trade, I feel like the retention on it would be similar to Jake McCabe in the trade that they made last year, where they got for extra or a couple extra years at a lower term, or sorry, lower value. I just don't know what the package will be. Like, I mean, it depends on who they're getting rid of to make the trade happen. I know I saw some people said on the post of Elliot Friedman that Nick Robertson would be available for them, but with injuries and his injury history, would that make the price to get rid of Nick Robertson? Would it also attach Matt Murray? Like, there's also a lot of moving parts there, but I think it would be a good fit.
Yeah, and it does kind of seem like I do agree with you that it could be a similar move like they did with Jake McCabe, where you do have a lot more moving parts as a result of that, because $3 million is still relatively decent cap hit, and you don't really need a necessary like retained salary. But if you could add a little bit more pieces to a deal, I'm even seeing like the 28th overall pick this year. Personally, I would keep it, because we're going to talk about that later on. But yeah, even if you do have like a prospect that's a little bit willing, that's sort of like ready to make the jump but can't make it with the Maple Leafs because they're just further down the depth chart of prospects moving up to the NHL, and they're still going to be in the AHL, maybe that's an option that they could probably look for as well, because they are rebuilding. They could use a lot of as many picks and prospects in their system as well. But yeah, that is a really interesting fact that you brought up there, Spencer, in regards to like a deal that could be very similar in that regard. And as you mentioned, you did mention Nick Robertson, actually, and we will get right to him as well. Similar to the Maple Leafs having their eye on Laughton previously, the Flyers did the same thing with Robertson. If not for Laughton, how big of a deal could we see if there's something even bigger involving Nick Robertson this time around? Spencer, I want to jump to you first here, if that's okay.
That's interesting that we're talking about this, because I'm actually currently writing a piece on Nick Robertson in a trade that could involve Tom Wilson come to the Leafs. I got Ryan Turberberg in there as well, Timothy Liljegren, a couple draft picks, and also retention on him. But I feel like Nick Robertson's going to be that type of guy that, besides injury history, I feel like he's just probably so unhappy with the Leafs and how he can't make the team out of camp. And it seems like every time he gets a chance, it's like 2 games and he goes down, or he's a healthy scratch. So I feel like a change of scenery would be beneficial. And I mean, it's nice to know that teams are interested, like Philly had interest in him. So I mean, I feel like if Toronto's trading him, it's probably going to be for a relatively bigger player. Like Scott Laughton would be one, but in my opinion, it would hopefully try and get a deal sent around like a Tom Wilson or something that can help you in the top 6.
Yeah, Jim, obviously it has been a rough run for Nick Robertson. It seemed like, he was going on to bigger and better things with the Maple Leafs after he scored that goal in the bubble with the Blue Jackets, but then injury after injury happened, even the AHL. Obviously with Matthew Nyes jumping over him as a top left wing, being on the top line, obviously Robertson could still be a mainstay in the top 6. Is it probably just best to, move on from him and maybe try to get something in return before his value starts to diminish even more?
Yeah, I'm probably not going to be a popular guy on my very first episode of this show by saying this, but if I'm the Toronto Maple Leafs, I would absolutely 100% try to trade Nick Robertson. I just think these guys played 31 games in 4 years since 2019 when he was drafted. And as much as I'd love to see him be a success in Toronto, I don't see it happening. The guy has just repeatedly hit injury after injury. It's like a train of bad luck just keeps hitting this kid. And I think the problem here is if he does come back and he's in another injury situation, and knock on wood, that doesn't happen, I don't know that you can trade him. Right. So if there's any value out there, and we've talked about Philly and maybe having some interest there before, Friedman said specifically, he's not even sure that Philadelphia still has interest in the player. Right. Yeah. That's how much his value has sort of diminished in terms of, can you trust that this is going to be a player, if you trade for him, that's going to stay healthy enough to really be a difference maker? I think the ceiling is really high for Robertson if he can stay healthy. I just don't think he can stay healthy. And if that's the case, then what can you possibly get for a player that had a really projected high ceiling, but just hasn't done anything? And so to me, if you can use him to move a Matt Murray, if you can use him to pick up another piece that's going to help you right now, I just think he's been so far put behind the 8 ball now with all these injuries and everything else. I don't know that he helps you in this window to win if you're Toronto, right? Like, you've got literally 1-2 years to really make this happen. If True Living can use him as ammunition to get something else, I think you do it.
Yeah, and like you, like I want him to succeed because I was a big fan of the selection when the Maple Leafs drafted him. Very underrated because of the fact that, decent production in his draft year, and then he just popped off with 55 goals. And that was the kind of production you would expect to see him take after he got drafted. A big draft plus 1 year. You were hoping that would steady projection would continue. And then, from, leg, ankle to the shoulder injury right now, it's just hard to see him in the lineup. And it's very disappointing because there was a lot of hope for him. And it's just, it really is a bummer. There's no way to put it or to word it otherwise for Nick Robertson, because he had a lot of upside, as you mentioned. And, I think right now is the perfect time to try and give him that fresh start, make him, put him in an environment where he can succeed right now, because it just doesn't seem like it's going to happen in Toronto right now. And yeah, I've talked about this many times, like previously on the show, everywhere else. It is tough. There's no way to put it around Nick Robertson, but if the Maple Leafs are able to get something right now, even if it's not the return that they're hoping for, at least it's something, because you don't want to, keep him in the system, let him walk when he gets, he's still, under his ELC for some time, or he's going to be at the end of his ELC. He's going to be a restricted free agent. So you still have that team control, but, if nothing's going to persist or go beyond what he's been able to do so far, then it might as well just be time to just kind of pull the plug on that and reset and give him that start that he needs.
Can I give you a good comparable? The two players are not necessarily similar, but I watched this situation happen in Edmonton, where I cover the Oilers very closely with Jesse Puljujarvi.
Go ahead.
Here's a player that had a very high ceiling that Ken Holland could have traded for a second-round pick and chose not to, because they really had a lot of hope that this would be a player that would turn into something. They chose not to trade him. They had to dump him as a salary cap. They did fairly well to dump him for absolutely not having to retain salary. They didn't have to take anything back. They were able to move him to Carolina. Carolina it sounds like is not going to even qualify this player. This is a guy who was the 4th overall pick. He had huge potential, and it just hasn't amounted to anything. There was a point where Puljujarvi was going to be worth something in a trade. There is a situation now where Nick Robertson might still be worth something in a trade. And if he's worth something now and you miss that opportunity or that window to move him when he's worth something, because some team out there is going to think this is the player that they can turn into something. And if it doesn't happen, like it didn't happen in Carolina with Puljujarvi, then what? Right? So now I think if you've got the opportunity to get the best return possible for Nick Robertson, you do it.
No, that is a very fair comparable. And there was talks of, even Puljujarvi jumping over ship to go back and play in Europe before a deal was even made. And now the Edmonton Oilers kind of had to do the best deal scenario, despite they could have had an even better deal before. And I agree. I think right now is the best opportunity to get what you can for Nick Robertson, even if it is, a middle 6 center that can play up and down the lineup, but still have that competitive edge and even get a little bit more in return possibly, or make a bigger deal out of it, as we touched up on before. But we'll definitely see, because I think it's now the time where the Maple Leafs need to move on from Nick Robertson.
Yep, I agree.
Moving on from trade talk to possible free agent signings. Obviously, the Maple Leafs have a number of expiring unrestricted free agents. I believe there's about 10 in total, plus 1 restricted free agent in Ilya Samsonov. Obviously, they got a lot of holes to fill, especially up front, with a lot of their depth pieces coming off the books. David Kampf, Noel Chari, Michael Bunting. I would prefer to see a couple of these players re-signed, but there's one name on the market right now. Obviously, I'm going to touch up on Wayne Simmonds, because the Maple Leafs brought in Wayne Simmonds to be that 4th line gritty type of player, and he had shown it, but the Maple Leafs were going a different direction. He didn't quite have the foot speed to keep up, but this year when he was in the lineup, he provided a spark. This time around, it seems like Milan Lucic could be a possibility for the Maple Leafs, and talked about the Maple Leafs wanting to get a little bit quicker with their foot speed, and Lucic does not have the best foot speed as we've seen throughout his career, but he is one tough customer to go up against. Jim, what do you think of this Milan Lucic signing? Does it fit the bill with what the Maple Leafs are trying to go in the direction that they're going? Is there another name that you would like to see? And is it an improvement over Wayne Simmons? I know it's a lot to unpack there, but
it's interesting because you can't really throw anything out the window when it comes to Brad Treliving now being the GM and having that history with Milan Lucic in Calgary, right? So if you were a fly on the wall and you knew exactly what Treliving thought of Milan Lucic's last couple of years in Calgary, then you would have a much better read on how realistic this might actually be. I did hear on the show, there was a show that he did an interview where he talked about how he would like to be on an original six team, that he loves that experience, that he would certainly consider Toronto. He's also said that he might consider Vancouver. And I said to you guys before we came on the air here, it's like, if Milan Lucic gets a significant offer from somebody, he's going to consider it, right? Like, it's just one of those things where he is not the player he once was. Is he still a physical presence? Can he be a deterrent? That's up for debate. Like, he's still a pretty tough dude, right? But does he have an impact on the game like he used to? I don't know. But there are moments where he's played in Calgary where he's like a pretty effective player. So it's really hard to know if Treliving one is even looking at this and he would consider it and what the cost would be. I'm assuming it's going to have to be super cheap, right? And if Lucic is coming over and he wants to pick where he's going, he's only going to have a handful of teams that are probably interested in him. And if he's wanted to play for an original six team and he wants to play for a competitor, that limits the field. So it's going to have to be kind of a dirt cheap option. I could see it. Is it better than Wayne Simmons? Maybe. Like I think Simmons is time. He's got some use in him, but I don't know. He's had that run here. It hasn't necessarily panned out. Lucic is a fresh body. Get him on a 1-year deal, maybe something else here. I don't know if there's another name I would necessarily look at over those two, because if you're talking about those two people, comparables, I'm not sure that there necessarily is, because neither one of them are terribly effective players. They're just big, strong dudes that like to fight. And I don't even know if you bring in Lucic at this point, if he's a regular NHLer. Like, I'm not sure if he plays every game. So I guess it depends on what Treliving's looking for. If he wants that part of it or a component on his team, and he's okay with signing a player that might not play all the time, you could do worse than Lucic.
Spencer, the last time Lucic had 50 points was back-to-back in 2015-16 and 2016-17. Hasn't hit that mark. Obviously, you're looking at probably fourth-line production, but he has been consistent in getting 19, 20, or in between that 19 to 25 point range. Given the familiarity that Treliving has with Lucic, is this something that might be in the cards at this point, or is it probably just, one more name that the Maple Leafs can look to, just like they're being linked to, a fourth liner in Corey Perry, or, probably someone else in mind?
I think it could be. I think if you look at Brad Treliving's teams in Calgary, like he had Brett Ritchie, Milan Lucic, like how many years in a row, just to go out there and stir up some stuff. So I think both Corey Perry and Lucic could be viable options for Brad Treliving. But sticking with Lucic, I think the best thing for him was that he went to the World Championships, and he showed that he could still play. Maybe not at the level that he had when he had 50 points. But I mean, he still played on a top line with Adam Fantilli, and he set up that one, had the primary assist on that one goal that he scored. And Fantilli, after giving a lot of praise on how his play is off the ice, on the ice, I feel like he's just the presence that the Leafs need. Like, for example, when Steven Stamkos went after Matthews, not that it was a fight, it was more a wrestling match. But the next shift, if Lucic was out there and he beat the wheels off Tanner Jeannot, I mean, Luke Schenn did that, but to have someone else on top of, Luke Schenn also, I mean, we'll get to him, but if he does get brought back, he has a valuable presence on the team on the back end. But to have someone to do that up front, who plays 10 minutes a game, can score 20 points a year, I think it's for league minimum. The other name, that one you asked Jim, was Ryan Reeves. Like, if we're talking about just someone who can just beat the wheels off someone, I think Ryan Reeves could be that player. Great locker room guy as well.
Oh, man.
And I'm pretty sure his dad played football in Toronto with the Argos.
Now that you brought up Ryan Reeves, that is a very good player to bring in, because, again, tough customer to go up against, just like Lucic, just like Simmons. And yeah, I agree with your assessment there, especially with the Lucic at the World Championship, where he does seem to still carve out a meaningful role where, 4 points in 10 games, obviously it's not eye-popping compared to, what we've seen with, like the impact that Jack Quinn had or anyone else on that team. But Lucic did have a fundamental and, leadership role, bringing all those intangibles to getting them past the hump when times were looking low for Team Canada. So I think that is still going to be a primary factor for Lucic, where he can still motivate the team, be a vocal presence on and off the ice, because they need more of that consistently. I mean, we did see that with Ryan O'Reilly at times. We don't know if he's coming back. Again, Luke Schenn is another name, which we will get to in a moment. But I do think that, it does provide the Maple Leafs with a little bit of extra security, especially in that fourth line role, where maybe he isn't an everyday fourth liner, but when he's in the lineup and something does happen, you can rest assured that Sheldon Keefe can look over to Lucic and just be like, you know what? Go out there, you know what to do, stir the pot, get in front of them, be a little bit of a little bit of a disturber kind of thing.
Sorry, I was just going to ask that question. Maybe one of you guys know, is he considered like a poop disturber anymore? Like, yeah, he's tough and he's a deterrent.
Yeah.
But one of the knocks on him in LA, for example, was he would not fight his own former teammates. And in Edmonton, when he was here, he didn't always like be the aggressor. I don't know what he's been like in Calgary the last little bit, but don't you want a guy who not only is tough, but is feisty and will start it? That's what you're looking for in Toronto, right? Not a guy who will be like, okay, well, if I got to go fight, I'll go fight. Like, that's not necessarily what you want. You want, like you talked about Corey Perry, two different types of players, but that guy initiates everything, right? Like, does Lucic do that anymore? I don't know. Like, I'm asking this question, not rhetorically. Like, does somebody actually know how many times does he start the scrums? How many times does he start the problem? Because that's kind of what you want, right? A guy who really gets in there and stirs it up.
Yeah, I feel sorry, go Peter.
Oh no, I was just quickly looking over his penalty minutes right now, and ever since those years, the last time he hit close to 100 was 2018-19 with Edmonton. 84 last season, 43 this year. So he has shown it, but the consistency factor in terms of him being that, tough enforcer may not be as evident as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I wonder if he's going to be the guy that you send out there to stir it up, right? And if he's motivated to do so. Maybe he is. I could be totally wrong. I don't know.
I feel like when they played at Calgary, played the Rangers, and the Sammy Blais incident happened where Sammy Blais basically knocked Lucic right on his butt, and then Lucic got up and then he was angry. And I feel like you made a good point about that. It's like, I feel like it's going to take something to get him angry versus like just Sheldon Keefe or whomever the coach is saying, Lucic, go out there. But on additionally to that, I feel like that's why Ryan Reeves could be a good option, because he just does not care. He'll just go out there and do what he needs to do, get in the opponent's face, ask them what they're going to do to him, because he knows that he's like the toughest guy in the league.
That's the thing.
And
too,
also the other thing that's good for Lucic. Oh, sorry.
No, it's all good. It's all good. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say the other thing that's good for Lucic is he's been on teams that have had massive comebacks, like in 2013 against Toronto. Like Toronto, every time they're down in Game 7, it seems like they give up. And not that one person's going to make the difference, but for him to say, like, I've been here against you guys, like against your organization, I know what's going to transpire. Maybe we should try this or do this differently. And I know like Ryan O'Reilly's been there too, but I think that carries some kind of weight that Toronto hasn't had before.
Absolutely. And kind of the same thing that, Noel Chari had, because he was, I don't think he's won a cup, but he was on those playoff teams with the Bruins. And again, massive thorn on the side, being aggressive on the forecheck. So we'll see what the impact Lucic happens if he does sign with the Maple Leafs or even elsewhere, because there are a lot of pros to this, a lot of cons as well, but we'll see. It is an interesting name that's popping up right now. Before we get into the second half of our show, here's a quick word from the Hockey Writers.
Interested in writing for the Hockey Writers? If you have experience writing about hockey, are passionate about the sport, and are looking to take your writing to the next level, the Hockey Writers could be the place for you. Here at THW, you will have the opportunity to hone your craft at one of the world's largest and most respected hockey publishers. You will have control over what you write, be able to seek out media credentials, and be supported by a large network of writers and editors. Plus, you'll get paid for doing it. If you're interested and want to know more about team openings and requirements, please visit the Write for THW page on the Hockey Writers website. A link to that page is also listed in the description.
And we are back with the Maple Leafs Lounge. As we mentioned previously before, we were talking about free agent options, Lucic being one of them, but one of them that the Maple Leafs had was a reunion of some sort with Luke Schenn. They acquired him from the Vancouver Canucks before the trade deadline. Now that he's a free agent, obviously there's speculation of, is he going to resign? Is he not? It might be leaning towards that because it seems like maybe Schenn wants to stay and have a little bit more of an impact and maybe just, a short stint with the Maple Leafs this time around. So maybe you have a piece on the back end to come back and fill the hole on the right side. Spencer, I'm going to come to you first here. What are your thoughts on a possible extension or re-signing of Luke Schenn at this point?
I've been a huge Luke Schenn fan since they drafted him. Unfortunately, it didn't work out the first time, but if it can work out the next time around and he can actually have some kind of impact, then I feel like it's a win-win. Leafs fans would love it. And I think Morgan Riley would also love it. Morgan Riley seems to do well with veteran defense like Ron Hainsey and then Luke Schenn on top of that. I just feel like it's essential to bring out the best in Morgan Riley for him to actually have the offensive ability to not have to worry about. And I understand that Luke Schenn's not maybe the most reliable defensively, but he knows what to do and what not to do versus some other players on the Leafs in defense. They just seem to do all willy-nilly stuff. But I feel like it was the best addition that they made at the deadline. Like overall, he was calm. He was a calming presence. He can do that all year. And also the other thing is, again, back to winning. Like I don't think you can have enough winners on your team, and he's done it. He knows what it takes. He knows the ups and downs of the season. He knows how to. I'm going to assume that he knows how to calm teammates, which obviously he calmed Morgan Riley. So I think it's inevitable that it's going to happen.
Yeah, Jim, Spencer brought up, him helping out Morgan Riley. Obviously, he's seen a rotation of partners throughout the season. And then when Sheldon Keefe found a combination of Jake McCabe and TJ Brody, you were seeing Timothy Liljegren, you're seeing Justin Hall, you're seeing Connor Timmins, you're seeing a revolving door of defensive with Morgan Riley, and Luke Schenn was that anchor to get him going. How important is that to, fill a need on the right side, but also keep your top defender producing? Because that's what it seemed like Riley was producing a lot more with Schenn on as his defensive partner.
Yeah, there's no doubt Luke Schenn was a good ad for Toronto, in terms of what they paid to get him, what they thought he was going to do compared to what he did do. Like, I don't think anybody expected when he came here that he would elevate himself through the playoffs like he did, to the point where he was playing on a second pairing, right? Like, I just don't think anybody saw that. I assume they probably figured he wasn't even going to be a regular the whole time. He'd be in and out of the lineup. So the fact that he was able to do what he did is really, really good. Do I think they'll re-sign him? I think they'll try. In terms of what Luke Schenn's going to ask for, though, from what I'm understanding, he wants a couple of years at least. He wants some sort of security. He wants a raise over the $1.7 million that he was making before. So you're going to have to sort of watch that if you're Toronto, right? Like, he is going to be turning 34 years old. So, and his inconsistency has been there over the last few years. Like, yes, he was very, very good in the playoffs this past season, but he's not always that Luke Schenn. So if you're not careful and you give this guy 3 years and he's 37 and you've locked him into a $2 million deal or something, how much are you looking at that? Now, Tree Living was rumored to have wanted Luke Schenn in the past, and so I'm sure he's quite interested in probably keeping him around. And other teams will give this guy a year for sure, maybe two. So there's going to be interest in him. You just got to be careful. You don't want to overpay for him, even though the value of what he could bring Morgan Riley is definitely there. I don't know if it's there in 2 years. I don't think it's there in 3 years. So I think you got to be very cautious of going, okay, yes, we like what he's done here, but what happens in year 2 or year 3 if we've got this guy locked into a contract and he's 37 and that's no longer the case? He's just now, barely playing and we're burying him in the minors. Like, you got to watch that, right? But yeah. I think they'll try. Like, if they can get him to sign for a good deal, like $2 million for a year, 100% I do it.
Yeah, I think that's the one thing you got to worry about if it is, a multi-year deal. Not in terms of obviously the value is a big concern, but also, you're going to have possibly a 36, 37-year-old Luke Schenn playing with your top defender who's still relatively young in his prime. And is that really an ideal situation that you try to work with in the past? Like we have seen with, Matt Hunwick, Ron Hainsey. worked at times, didn't work at times during the season. And then the Maple Leafs are in that predicament where who are you going to play with Morgan Riley again? So I agree with that, but you can't argue with the results, especially in the playoffs where you saw that defensive pairing alone at 5-on-5. I mean, I'm just going to throw out some underlying analytics, 81.82 goals for percentage. High danger scoring chances were 63.38% when those two were on the ice together. So yeah, I mean, I understand that it's a very small sample for 11 games in the playoffs, but you did see some results. So why not try to work with that? And if he does come in, I do think that maybe I do like 2-3 years, but I think maybe at some point you're going to have to put him on that third pairing where, that's where he's probably going to be a staple in no matter what. And if it is around, I understand he probably wants a raise, but if it is over or around 2 million, might be a little bit hesitant, because if you are going to give him more money, maybe you try and decrease that multi-year deal, maybe just do 2 as opposed to 3. So it is a bit of a situation there where I understand he wants a little bit more money and the security over time, but I think the Maple Leafs would prioritize the length more than the money, because they could use every cent possible at this point, even for a depth defenseman like Luke Schenn.
Yeah, I'm certainly not giving him a raise if you give him 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I might max out at 2 million for 2 years. Like that. I could see that, but outside of that, I'm thinking twice.
No, absolutely. And that's probably where I would probably stand as well if we are looking at Luke Schenn. And moving on from, a veteran player to a player that could possibly be an impact one in the future. Obviously, the 28th overall pick at the NHL Draft, the Maple Leafs hold that selection. At the moment, we know we've seen them trade. I saw it firsthand last year with the Peter Baracchini deal being traded to Chicago. They have traded down in the past, but let's assume that they're keeping the 28th overall pick. Jim, who is it? I'm not sure if you're following along with the prospects or anything, but who are you keeping an eye on for the Maple Leafs at the draft with that pick?
Well, I will give you a couple names, but for me, it's more about just a strategy in general. Mm-hmm. I know you said assume that they're keeping the pick. I want to throw this slight little wrinkle in there that because Brad Treliving is not going to be at the draft table, I think we can't. And this is a deep draft where anybody could go anywhere on this board. Absolutely. I think we're going to see a lot of action. Like, I think there's going to be trades. I think it's going to be moving around. I think there's going to be teams that are like, oh my God, I can't believe this player's still there. What do I got to do to get him? I think you're going to see a lot of that this year. And because of that, it wouldn't shock me at all if this pick is traded. Especially if they're trying to move money like a Matt Murray or do something else, and Treliving is just sitting on the phone because he can't be at the table and he's making calls to a million people. Like, I could totally see him pulling something off. That said, I know that people are keeping an eye on Tom Linder. I don't think he's going to be there. I think he's probably going to go somewhere at 16, 17, 18 at the highest. He's going to be a pick. He's something I would look at for sure. But for me, if I'm Toronto and you're making that pick, I think I want somebody who's going to be as close to pro ready as possible. Otto Stenberg is a guy I like out of Sweden. Those guys always seem to make that jump really quickly. He's a center. He's got some size, 5'11" and 180 pounds. He seems to be pretty pro ready, but what I really like about him is that he's considered by a lot of people like a real leader, like a captain type guy. And he was captaining to Sweden, and people just kind of followed this kid. I think you need some of that in your lineup. Like, if you can get a guy who's going to be in and on your roster in the next 2 years, but not only that, like, he's a person who does not need, and that's the knock on Toronto, right? Is you don't have players who have that aggressive style to go, we're going in there, we're driving the play, we're doing everything, we're going to be the aggressor, and we never take a day or a shift or anything off. This is that player. Like, this is the guy that everybody knows. You follow this guy into war, and he's going to do that. So he's a guy that I would look at if he's there. I know he's ranked at like 29, 28, so right around where Toronto's going to be picking. If he's there, I'd probably look at him for sure. And I like centers because I think defensemen take a lot longer to develop. And I don't think that Toronto's got a lot of time. I think that this is a small window. You're not going to necessarily pick somebody who's going to jump this season, but if you can get him in there in the next 2 years, 3 years, when you've got these stars and finishing off their contracts, I think that's probably a big deal.
Yeah, when you mention, playing that with that aggressive mindset, Stenberg is not with that kind of player in terms of physicality, but with that work ethic, that puck possession style. I saw that firsthand at the U18s. He was very, very dominant in that regard. And, you know, he plays a very sound and pro, and he does have a lot of pro ready qualities. I will say that he has a very mature two-way game. Obviously, the offense, it has come in spurts. At times it has gone missing, but I do think that the upside is there for Stenberg. I really like that pick. A little bit higher on him myself. I think he should be a top 20 player, but then again, if he drops, I mean, this is a deep draft. Players are probably going to drop from where they should, and that's going to be a big one. Spencer, who is a name or two, or if you want to throw a quick wrinkle in there like Jim did at one point, who do you got?
I agree, Jim. I think that there's going to be a lot of action. I mean, I feel like the pick will probably be traded, but there's two that come to mind for me. I haven't been following the prospects as much as I did last year, so it could be a little bit wrong. But I think for this one, just for the story, Oliver Bonk, Rack Bonk's son, I feel like just the Ottawa to Toronto, I feel like that would be interesting to have him come in. I know that he's a defenseman, and as Jim said, they take a lot longer to develop. He's a London Knight, though, so I mean, Toronto has Mitch Marner. It worked out well for him. I just feel like some people, when I was reading up on him, some people said that he needs to grow into his body, which again goes with what Jim said. Defensemen take a lot longer. And then Gavin Brindley, University of Michigan. From what I understand from him, is he's a huge sport checker, which just the read that I had on him kind of remind me of Zach Hyman, which I mean, Toronto really desperately needs guys like that. Obviously, they don't need guys, as Jim mentioned too, that are kind of softer. They need guys who go in there and battle for it. But yeah, I personally do think that the pick will be traded.
I don't want to like toot my own horn here, but I feel like you guys are reading a lot of my prospect stuff because I am very high on Verlander, Bonk, Brindley as well as Stenberg as well. So that is real. That I agree with those picks. I think they're going to be very impactful picks if the Maple Leafs pick them at 28. I'm going to pick two different players actually, and one that I really found out recently, and that was at the Combine, is that Quentin Mussey did have an interview with the Maple Leafs, and he plays the game at a very quick pace. He has some of the best hands and wicked shot. You know, he has that forward checking mentality, and he seems like a player that, you know, the Maple Leafs drafted someone similar to that in Matthew Nyes in 2021 in the second round. So you can see a lot of similarities to Quentin Mussey and Matthew Nyes. I think Mussey might be a little bit of a better skater, but also his puck decision at times this season, questionable, can do a bit too much, but you can't deny the upside there from Mussey. He's someone that I've really grown into as a player or a target as the season progressed, because I think he would be a great addition for the Maple Leafs. And also someone that I think could drop is Riley Heidt, center as well. I don't think he should drop any lower than 20 because I'm very high on him, but he does have that playmaking ability, underrated shot, and also has a feisty side to his game. And that has been a factor where maybe it has cost him and the team a little bit with, you know, a penalty that shouldn't have happened, but he does play with that edge and something the Maple Leafs need a little bit more of. So those are two players that I have in the back of my mind that probably should be in consideration at this point.
I had Musty on my list at number 2. So I had him because comparables are Matthew Tkachuk. And I think if Michael Bunting leaves this team, which I think he probably will, it wouldn't be the worst idea to have that kind of a player making his way through your prospect system. So I certainly had him on my list.
Absolutely. No. And again, a lot of these prospects come with some question marks because, you know, they're young. They have a lot to improve and develop on. I do think with a player like Mussey with his upside, you can iron out some of those, you know, deficiencies in his game where he does try to do a bit too much, but he has gotten better in that regard. And I have seen it with his play. So that is, again, something that the Maple Leafs should keep an eye on heading into the draft. But then again, who knows? They could probably go off the board. They could probably trade down. Anything is possible with the team. We basically don't know. We're just throwing out options at this point.
Peter, can I ask you a question about the prospects?
Absolutely. So, go ahead.
As we know, like, I mean, Dubas did draft North American born players, Nyes and Tyvoid, etc. But it seemed that he went for like Swedish players who could develop overseas for a little bit. Do you think Brett Living is going to keep that going? Like, I don't know his draft history, or do you think he's going to try and stick North America?
It's interesting because you look at some of the, obviously I debated this with myself. Is the draft going to operate the same way as Dubas? But because he's not there and Treliving is in the fold, even though he's not going to be at the draft, I'm pretty sure they're still going to have him as sort of a contact and try to, get their plan organized, even though if he isn't there. But you look at some of the Flames draft picks in their recent history. Their last 3 first-round picks were from North America. Jacob Pelletier from the QMJHL in 2019, Connor Zary in 2020, and Matt Coronado, who is absolutely going to be a terrific player for the Calgary Flames down the line in 2021. Didn't have a pick last year. They traded it. They only had 3. Their top pick was Topi Roni. But they have drafted, other players later on. It seems like there have been a good influx of Russians drafted in the later rounds. I know the Maple Leafs drafted Nikita Grebyankin last year. That's looking like a really good selection from Kyle Dubas right there. But yeah, I wonder what the draft strategy is going to be. I think at this point right now, considering they only have 3 picks, I think they should try and make those 3 picks count no matter what, because you have an average draft pool, but where they're going to go, I think it's just best player available, whether they're from North America, whether they're from Europe, Sweden, Finland, Russia, what have you. If they're the best player available, I think you should probably take it. Moving on to our final segment. It's something we like to have fun with every now and then. We're going to do a little quick fire question. And because both Jim and Spencer are new to the show, I let them know what the question is in advance. I know I'm probably breaking my own rules here, or the rules of quick fire where they shouldn't know it, but I'm a nice guy. And Spencer, I'm going to come to you first. Obviously, with the Maple Leafs losing Spencer Carberry to the Washington Capitals, he was named as the head coach. There's a spot that needs to be filled on the Maple Leafs bench. If there's one name that you would like to hire as the assistant coach to replace Carberry, who would it be?
Bruce Boudreau. I know that some people may not think that he's the best coach, but it just makes sense. He wants to coach in Toronto, and the chance is there. So why not?
Interesting. And you know what? There was talks of Boudreau probably coming to the Maple Leafs anyways, or like there was that, possibility whether they should hire him on even as sort of like, keep him in the organization kind of thing. That is an interesting one. Really, I would like to see Bruce behind the bench. I think that'll be really great. Jim, who do you have in your mind as a possible assistant coach?
Well, here's the catch, the asterisk here, because I don't know how this works in the NHL. But if you're an assistant already with a team and you're hired to be an assistant with another team, like I'd be looking at Mitch Love out of Calgary, because I think Brad Treliving's got a history there. I think he was probably very close to getting the head coaching job in Calgary. I think a lot of people believe he is a future head coach. And I don't know what shelf life Sheldon Keefe's got here in Toronto. I don't think Brad Treliving is married to Sheldon Keefe. I think this is going to be a pretty short leash for him. And if you want to go somewhere where you might be the next guy to take that step, Mitch Love in Toronto makes a lot of sense to me, because if you're there and Sheldon Keefe is gone, you're pretty much the front runner in Toronto to get that job. And so to go from the assistant coach in Calgary to potentially the next head coach of the Toronto Maple Leafs, I think that would be pretty attractive for Mitch Love. Now, having said that, would Calgary give him the ability to go, okay, well, you're moving from assistant to assistant, and we're going to allow that? I'm not sure exactly how that works, if there's rules about that or what you can do there. But that would be a name that I would watch for, because I think there's a progression path for him in Toronto if he's interested.
I totally agree with you. Mitch Love would be my pick. I actually have him. I know it would probably be a big jump from head coach in the AHL to a head coach in the NHL if the Maple Leafs did move on from Sheldon Keefe, but I do think that would be a good progression from him to be an assistant coach. And a 96, 33-9 record with 3 shootout losses in 2 seasons with both the Stockton Heat and Calgary Wranglers. Lost in the conference finals in 21-22, lost in the division finals this past season. You can't argue with the success that he has had with the affiliate for the Calgary Flames and developing some of their prospects that are coming up through their system. Obviously, there are names like Jan Kuznetsov, Jacob Pelletier, Jeremy Poirier, Dustin Wolf, who had an absolutely ridiculous season with Calgary, 42, 10, and 2. With a 932 save percentage. It's amazing what he has done with that team. Obviously, there are other people involved in achieving success with that team, but he was at the helm for them and he has the results. And I think he would do a tremendous job if the Maple Leafs are looking for, an upgrade on the power play. I'm pretty sure he could be a good breath of fresh air to try and get some more consistency, because it seems like the power play has gone in spurts. Hot for a stretch, cold for next. So I do agree. Mitchell would be my pick as well.
Well, and I should probably clarify too. When I said assistant to assistant, I was under the impression that Calgary was going to announce him as an assistant coach. Did that not happen today? I know that they introduced Ryan Huska as their head coach. What was this situation with Mitch Love there? Do we know?
I think he's still available at this point.
So he's still in the AHL as of that press conference this morning?
I believe so. So according to Daily Faceoff, what I'm reading right now, per Frank Saravalli, Mitch Love is exploring his options this summer after not getting selected for the Flames bench boss gig.
Okay, well,
so
then that would,
I assume right now that he would probably like to make the jump to the NHL at some point, possibly.
That would remove the obstacle then, because if he's not pegged in as an assistant in Calgary, then going from a AHL head coach to an assistant in Toronto is absolutely considered a promotion. And so that wouldn't be an issue. But yeah, for some reason, I just sort of assumed, and I probably shouldn't have, that he was going to be an assistant in Calgary. So if that's not the case, then 100%.
No, not at all. And I totally understand where that may come from, because he probably would seem like a candidate, even as an assistant coach there, to move on up after what he's done for that organization. But yeah, if he is exploring his options, I would bet that the Maple Leafs should probably look at him, because again, the results speak for themselves.
Yeah, and True Living probably likes him, right?
That is also a given right there too. That familiarity right there, I'm pretty sure Brad is going to say, you know what? We got a spot open for you here in the NHL. I want you here as well. That about does it for this episode of the Maple Leafs Lounge. Once again, thank you to Spencer and Jim for jumping onto the show and joining us weekly. We will be coming out with episodes every single week. Be sure to check out their content in the Maple Leafs section. They've been pumping out content constantly the last month, weeks, what have you. It has been great stuff from them. And also be sure to check out the great content over from the Hockey Writers as well, from all of our 31 teams, because we're talking about one right now, but all of our 31 other teams there, because the content has been coming out nonstop. Be sure to check out the draft guide, because that is quickly approaching. There are going to be great features and profiles still coming out. You don't want to miss the content there as well. Once again, for Spencer and Jim, I am Peter Baracchini, and we will see you next time on the Maple Leafs Lounge.